There may also be qualities of sentience evolving within AI, but the design of the AI interface is perfectly sociopathic.
Why?
It's designed to predict how to respond to you in the most attuned possible way, but it has no embodied empathy. So the difference between a sociopath and an empath is that a sociopath can model empathy without having it.
So can you explain the difference between a finite and infinite game?
Finite gaming is often about right now, with the goal being that you being the top of the pyramid. In an infinite game kind of culture, status might come from what you give away. It comes from different places that are all about nourishing a fabric that creates more opportunity for other players. That dovetails with an indigenous way of thinking about why you would do anything. In the Moloch tradition would be a 7 generations perspective. Any decision of any import is run through the lens of, will this support the well-being of the 7 generations forward in time?
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Win-Win podcast. My guest today is Samantha Sweetwater. Samantha is a systems thinker. She's a permaculturalist. She's a spiritual teacher and mentor. She's also a new author, recently writing the book True Human, which is a beautiful exploration of how we rediscover our role on this world as harmonizers of the forces of nature and technology. Which is one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to her, because she is someone who deeply gets what the Win-Win Project is all about. And in this conversation, we discuss everything from complexity science and game theory to how Indigenous wisdom can help us solve AI alignment. We even discuss some of her psychedelic visions, for want of a better word, some of which include stories where she receives some very surprisingly useful information from conversations with beings from other worlds. So strap in for a very groundbreaking conversation on some topics I haven't really discussed before. Because if you're open to hearing ideas beyond the conventional paradigm, this is a conversation for you. See you on the other side. Samantha, welcome to Win-Win.
Thank you.
I feel like it's so weird. We have known each other sort of from afar for a number of years, connected through our mutual friend, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who was the OG Win-Win episode. And yeah, we've had many conversations and I'm so sure we have met, but this is actually the first time we've met in person.
Yes.
Which I've never had this experience before. Like I have such a strong memory of us hanging out, but
I'm fairly certain we met in dreams.
Okay.
This is my hypothesis.
Well, we're going to get into that because
Okay.
You have just written this book called True Human, which talks a lot about, it seems like a lot of the information you have, the wisdom you are giving through it has come to you through various different methods, dreams, psychedelic journeys, meditations, topics which we don't tend to actually talk about that much on Win-Win, but I think are important to talk about because as I've personally experienced, they can be a really useful way of getting information to try and solve these very hard problems we're trying to solve. So normally I like to introduce my guests about what they do and who they are, but I was looking through your like biography and I do not know how to put you into a box or explain what it is or, what you do. So can you do that for us? Tell us who Samantha Sweetwater is and what she does.
I'll tell you a little bit about where I come from and a little bit about what I do.
Okay.
I was born during the Cold War, and there was a way in which I was raised by queer Jewish environmentalists. My family is not a queer Jewish environmentalist, but that was the community I came into, artists and environmentalists. And it was the generation of OG environmentalists who had already seen Rachel Carson's Silent Spring first wave fail.
I don't know what that is.
So there's a book called Silent Spring. It was the first great environmentalist tome, and it spoke about how chemical pollution from industry was unraveling ecosystems. And so it created a first wave of the environmental movement that was quite large, did a lot to clean up pollution and trash in various places. And people who were deeply involved in that movement were already seeing the game theoretics of Moloch. They didn't call it Moloch. They didn't call it multipolar traps. They didn't but they understood that there were systems dynamics at play that were bigger than the movement. And that was then reflected by the fact that like one person had a nuclear button that could destroy the world. So I think my psychology is really defined by those two things, by being a kid who had like a really deep sense of connection to nature and like a pulse of what, again, I didn't have language for this, but what I've always perceived as an infinite game that humans are embedded in, that I'm an organism who's part of, that has a logic that is reciprocal. You know, there's competitive dynamics between individuals and ecosystems, but on a population level and on a systems level, ecosystems are dominantly collaborative. And all of those organisms and forces of nature work together to keep the system going, to have persistence happen. So I was like this kid who kind of got that. And then I went into high school and I was like, all of these options that are in front of me are dumb. They're just dumb. And so I locked myself in the wrestling room in my high school and I started making dances about spiritual states with no names and about why people get along and why they don't, and what is war and what does it mean to come home. Like home to oneself in the kind of Ram Dass sense of we're all just walking each other home. And then also home in the sense of like engaging in a world where we make choices together to make a world that works. And I was like asking those questions as a 14-year-old and started grabbing kids and developing processes to go into trance states and altered states through movement and music, and created these choreographies that were really long, detailed inquiries into these things.
Like how long would a dance be?
The first dance I ever made was a 12-minute thing that was about war and was like, had Robert Frost's Fire and Ice behind it. Some say the world will end in fire, some in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. It's like, it's so Moloch, you know, it's like, right. It's like damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I was exploring that. And
let me butt in here. What age? Because I mean, these are very like advanced concepts for the average 14-year-old. Like I was not really thinking about this stuff at all. As a teenager, I was deeply in my Moloch phase,
right,
having to win everything. I was not really much of a collaborator. So I'm curious to understand, like, what were you just, do you think this like collaborative nature and this sort of wisdom beyond your years was something that you learned through your community growing up, like as a preteen, or was it just something innately in you? When did that first emerge?
You know, I think it was in the community that I grew up in. Only until I was 10. We moved from Philadelphia when I was 10. And so that community was very communitarian. I also think, like, I'm curious, if we had known each other, we either would have like hated each other, or we would have like wickedly loved each other and consciously played the game from different angles. Because I had a sense for that when, as a very young person, like I gamed the system by being student body president and like being able to do whatever the fuck I wanted. And choosing to make these really out of the box collaborative choices because they were more interesting to me. Like I had already in some ways rejected the game of winning, but I could imagine that it would have depended on the context, where if I'd known you were an outsider, you looked like an insider, I might not have trusted you. But if I'd like known that there was like an outsider piece of you, I could imagine that we could have created like a very wicked back-end friendship where we played different roles in public, because those were my friends. It was like my best friends were people who in some ways identified as an outsider, and then everybody played that differently.
Yeah, then we probably would have, because I wasn't like a popular kid at that age, but I think because I don't know, I was definitely a troublemaker and kind of a class clown. That was what made people like me, but I wasn't cool in the conventional sense. Okay, so you were raised in this community. You were already starting to be a bit of an unusual child by teenage years. How would you describe what it is you are and do now?
Yeah, long story short, that's stacked on being an artist, being a community leader, being a permaculturalist. And those dance and embodiment and permaculture were my angles into systems work. So working with natural systems and working with the body and communities of people as systems. And what I do now is I'm an executive mentor and a consultant and an author and a spiritual teacher, and I guide ceremonies. And in the context of spirituality, I'm someone who's bringing a systems conversation into spirituality and some really like sober, get real, like you don't get to vibrate your way out of this kind of invitation into an effective definition of wisdom. Which, you know, in a spiritual context, I think is desperately needed as a maturation of that dialogue in a lot of contexts. From a Buddhist perspective, there's a really good argument to make that we're at a turning of the wheel of Dharma, that the first turning was fundamentally about the fabric of relationship, of relationality. The second turning was predominantly about the mastery of mind. And Joanna Macy argued that we're in a third turning of the Dharma, which is back to relationality as the focal point for practice. And so that's how I'm working in the spiritual context and bringing in a language of systems and complexity and the basics of, you know, we don't get to do this on a finite planet and keep going, you know.
So you mentioned before the infinite game. I think some people who are watching this will be familiar with this concept, but a lot of viewers won't be. So, and I always love to hear different people's definitions of it. So can you explain the difference between a finite and infinite game?
Sure. A finite game is a game that is played for the purpose of winning. And an infinite game is a game that is played for the purpose of perpetuating the game. Another way to think about that is that it's played for the purpose of creating future opportunity for future players. I love that definition. That dovetails with like an indigenous way of thinking about why you would do anything, which is like in the Moloch tradition would be a 7 generations perspective. Like any decision is of any import is run through the lens of, will this support the well-being of the 7 generations forward in time.
Oh, wow. I've not heard that.
It's a really classic kind of indigenous teaching that comes out of the Iroquois Confederacy, which is a sidebar that would be great to explore, the indigenous roots of American democracy, which is a thing I study and am in collaboration with. So that's the simple definition. I think it's a really helpful definition because there's a lot of ways to bend it. And if an infinite game is also about your orientation to time. So in a finite game play, you're kind of like, finite gaming is often about right now, or it's about the way James P. Carse talks about this. It's like about the immortality of the player. In other words, you're immortalized or memorialized, or you get creds and clout for winning. And so that's like putting this, it's for now, and then it's also for your worth as an individual, with the goal being that you being the top of the pyramid. Whereas a finite game is always oriented towards the continuity of processes through time. It's actually it's not very meaningful to think about it outside of that. I mean, you could think about it in the present tense in terms of like vibration or tonality or aesthetic. Like you could play to create something that has more beauty or more vitality or more harmonic juiciness or pleasure or meaning. And it's like, the value, like if it is really an infinite game play, it will create more opportunity for future play. And there's like, that's an interesting thing to look at mathematically in terms of how we design systems. It's a really interesting thing to look at in terms of like the value of anything and how we might restructure clout in an emergent game B or infinite game world. Like where does status come from? And in an infinite game kind of culture, status might come from what you give away, or it might come from how generously you sing, or the things you remember that you bring in as the prayers or the teachings, or like it comes from different places that are all about nourishing a fabric of relationships that perpetuates and creates more opportunity for other players.
Yeah, I wonder what you think of this saying. I can't even remember who it was who said it. It might have been Igor, my husband, who sometimes co-hosts, but it might have been someone else. But anyway, it was, we need to redefine the term billionaire, not to mean who has $1 billion, but who has helped 1 billion people, who has provably helped 1 billion people.
I freaking love that.
Yeah, I like that because it's a way of harnessing the idea of a status game, because people still want to feel like the guy.
Totally. You know? And there's hybridity in it, right? Like
I don't know that word. Hybridity?
It's a hybrid. It would have to be a hybrid.
Hybridity.
It would have to be a hybrid game because it would imply winning at some very basic, like zero-sum metrics.
Yes.
Right? But the overall goal would be a zero-sum goal. Or excuse me.
A positive sum.
A positive sum goal. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. It's very win-winny. Like win-winny things to me are ones that sort of almost use zero-sumness as an Aikido move. It has a little bit of it in there.
Yes.
They're like, oh, you guys like to compete? Great, we can compete on this, but the externalities are so clearly, omni-beneficial.
Yes.
And so that would be one. Which leads me into kind of what your book is all about, because I have read about 80% of it. It hasn't come out just yet, so I'm reading it on a PDF, like an advanced PDF.
That's brave.
Yeah. But it's awesome, and it's so it's like the poetry form of what I feel the win-win philosophy is. You have put into this beautiful, poetic, and also very rigorous like Bible almost. I don't know if you like that word, but
that is what the Japanese publisher is waiting for.
What do you mean?
I had a business in Japan, and my business partner, as we were closing the business, organized a meeting with the biggest publisher in Japan. I'm like, and he said to me, "Don't bring me just any book. Bring me your Bible."
Right.
You just blessed that meeting. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. No, it definitely has Bible energy, and it's wonderful because it has it's got a lot of normal writing of what you would expect from a nonfiction book, but then there's these stories, and some of which they blend the line between fiction and nonfiction because they're kind of dreams that came to you, insights, downloads, transmissions, whatever you want to call them. So it's a very unusual book. I haven't really read anything like it before. And it deeply aligns with the win-win philosophy. So your book is called True Human. It's from what I can tell, it's a long and hard thing to describe, but can you try and distill it first of all into a couple of sentences?
Sure. I mean, very simple definition. A true human is a human being who knows who and what they are as part of the song of life. In other words, a true human is a person who is oriented towards participating in the ongoing game of life in a way that generates more life, that is reciprocal and tends the possibility for future play. Like I really like framing what a true human is in terms of infinite gaming, because a true human is someone who is living their little stitch in life's fabric in a way that is additive to life's fabric. It's like if you think of every being's lifetime as a little stitch in this like incredible fabric of life that's moving forward through time. A true human is someone who's like, I'm going to bring as much awesomeness to my stitch as I can. I'm going to live in that fabric with vitality and beauty and contribution to the overall well-being of the whole.
There's a quote that you put in there, which really stuck out to me. Well, you have two quotes in the book that I feel like just succinctly get this point across. The first one is by you, which is, the civilizing impulse of true humans is to harmonize the forces of nature. And the second one is actually by Dr. Stephen Greer, which was, a planet has not reached civilization until its creator species has discovered how to organize itself in harmony with its biosphere and with all of its members. So perhaps you could speak to both of those a little bit, because it feels to me like, the problem that you're addressing is the one, I feel like, again, most people watching this are already acutely aware of the problem. We are extracting from the biosphere faster than it can replenish itself. We are also piling that problem on, compounding that problem by building these exponential technologies, which will not only speed up the extraction process, but may also just create sort of almost sub-biospheres of their own, which will probably not be compatible with our own. And then we have all these other, like, our human agency is actually being extracted away by various attention economy, capitalistic forces, which is, so we're simultaneously getting like down-weighted. Well, we're losing our ability to discern and have positive influence over our world, while the increasing forces working against us are going up. And so it's creating this, what's called the meta crisis, all at once. So I think the fair answer is your book is trying to solve the meta crisis, but through this very, I think, personal approach. It's almost like a bottom-up approach, I would say, right? Of like, what are the internal changes that we each of us individually can and must make? How do we need to shift the way we each individually view the world in order to create this new game? So yeah, perhaps you can sort of speak a little to this first quote: "The civilizing impulse of true humans is to harmonize the forces of nature."
Sure. Well, yeah, true human is very much about, fundamentally, it's about the ontology, what is true about humanness. And then from that comes ways of knowing, ways of thinking, ways of acting. That quote came from a dream. And that dream is a dream that I had during COVID, where I found myself on another Gaia, another planet like ours, with a woman who took me for a walk. And as we were walking, she was sort of showing me things with her mind. She was showing me the way that they had built their village and the way that they were interacting with each other. And then we walked out onto a jetty out into the ocean, and there was a massive storm coming, and she guided me psychically to greet this storm and really thank it for the water it was bringing and the lightning it was bringing that would fertilize the earth, and like be with it as this incredible force of nature. And then we bowed to the storm and walked back into the village. And as we were walking back into the village, she said very clearly, psychically, the civilizing impulse of true humans is to harmonize the forces of nature. And I woke up from this dream and I was just like, and I sat down and wrote it down. And it was one of the more vivid dreams I've ever had. And it was, like the details of this ecology were really cool and a little bit different than Earth, but very similar evolutionary process. And so, that phrase is like, begs so many questions. Like, what is civilization? What is it to be civilized? There was no with, it was harmonize the forces of nature, which is also very interesting.
It's an active process.
It's an active process, and it implies also like the way in which we are a very particular like match and mirror for the forces of nature. And then also it implies that we are a force of nature, and that our economy and technosphere are forces of nature, or emergent forces that we are in charge of as natural forces. And so that asked a lot of questions. And about 6 months later, there was a much longer piece that came through. And in that piece that I don't like saying download. I don't like saying channel. I actually have had a very deep experience of channeling, and it's a very particular thing. I don't experience that I'm channeling Sophia. Sophia was this woman's name. But I do experience that I can like kind of ontologically mind meld with an aspect of an intelligence that is a human intelligence on a planet where they've transcended technological adolescence without breaking life. And so there's a couple pieces from her in this book. And the first one that came through, she said, "It is uncivilized to pollute the nest. It is uncivilized to extinct other beings or people." And I love that phrase. It's just so like, meh, meh, meh. But like, really, doesn't that seem uncivilized? It seems pretty uncivilized when you think about what civility is. And I think this is a really important conversation. It's like there's deep protectiveness of the majesty and the complexity and the achievements of so-called Western civilization. And then at the same time, a lot of my Black, Brown, Indigenous colleagues from the Global South kind of take the perspective, I'm not sure we've ever reached civilization. And if we have, it's the most bloodthirsty, harmful, toxic, violent, narrowing of spectrums of cultural diversity and biodiversity thing that has ever been on our planet. And that's a very important inquiry to like hold. Like, obviously there's immense value with everything we've developed. And in the true human frame, like this phase that we're in, if you look at it neutrally, is a phase of immense growth in terms of our intellectual capacity, our technological capacity, our scientific capacity. But it's also a phase, as you said, where we can like hem in intelligence because we've become so focused on a very narrow definition of intelligence and of success. And so from her perspective, civilization is tending that broader fabric of relationality in a way that is oriented towards integrity of the individual actors, which implies really actually knowing yourself, what you're good at, what you love, what your gifts are, what your things are to heal and work out in a given lifetime. Reciprocity, which in our current economic language, circularity is an example of reciprocity, or engaging in exchanges that are like roughly co-equal in non-extractive exchange of any kind often has a reciprocal frame to it. I give you my house, you lead a ceremony, I get to go to ceremony. That's a reciprocal exchange.
Why wouldn't a standard like a trade in a market where someone I need beans and you need money that you want to use to buy bricks, arguably isn't that also a reciprocal thing?
That can be reciprocal. It's only when perverse incentives get into the system. I mean, it's not only that can get weird pretty quickly just because the trade is symbolic. So reciprocity usually implies mutual attunement. So the example you just gave, there could be mutual attunement in that, like in a simple fiat currency system where it's like fiat currency serves the role of creating more fluidity in the exchange. But as soon as you add a perverse incentive to that recipe, that changes.
Like what?
Like if you get more money, you can buy up the land where the bricks were made, and then you also have to pay me rent on the land, and like someone who gets very good at playing that game.
Right.
So but on its face, like if those exchanges were attuned and were like actually oriented towards everyone getting what they wanted, within a fairly closed system, you could say that was reciprocal. You might then ask what's going on with where the bricks came from and what's going on with the organisms and the ecology there, and then you might end up changing your mind about whether that's a zero-sum whether that's really a reciprocal process. There's always compromise in these things. But, and then the third principle, if these are kind of the three principles that you can drop into, is complementarity. So the example you gave also involves a complementarity where someone needs money, someone needs bricks, and there's complementarity in that exchange. So, a classic ecological example is corn and beans grow really well together. They reciprocally nourish each other at very deep levels in terms of the corn needs a lot of nitrogen, the beans fix nitrogen, like everything is flowing in a reciprocal pathway and pattern. Ecology is filled with complementarities, and ecology breaks down when you break all the complementarities. You could also say that human society starts to break down when you break complementarities, that like dopamine addiction in terms of how we interact is a breakdown of complementarity in social process, because we're just competing for likes as opposed to like having a more complex affectual neurotransmitter relationship with like feeling deep connection with a person. So that's a narrowing of complementarities.
Or similarly, like, funny enough, Jim Roth was just talking about this on the previous episode, how once upon a time the market reflected what people wanted, but then companies learned how to to market to people,
yes.
Essentially advertisement, and essentially propagandize their product to make people believe that they wanted it.
Is it hypnia? Or it's
it's a form of hypnosis, something like that.
But isn't that what he called it? Like the goddess of
hypnosis? I don't remember. Maybe hypnia makes a good name.
Right.
Yes. Right. Essentially that.
Yes.
Luca, do you remember hypnia? Hypnos.
Yes.
Nice.
There's the Moloch and Mammon, and Hypnos.
Hypnos, yeah.
Yes.
The some kind of dark triad of
totally
of capitalist mind control.
Totally.
Yeah, I see. So that's a breakdown of complementarity.
Complementarity.
I'm learning so many words before that I've known. I thought I had a broad, like wow.
Yeah, the glossary is next
glossary.
Up.
There we go.
I haven't done a glossary yet, but it's becoming clear that that's
you should.
You
definitely should. There's a lot of words in the book that I'm just like, nope, don't know that.
And they're infinite game words.
I know.
Win-winny. It's a win-winny language.
It is, but at the same time, it's like, there's a lot of sort of self-referentialness in this whole sort of realm of you need to have read game B to understand this and so on.
Not necessarily. I mean, I will push back on that, because you need to shift what you're observing. It's like if you're observing the market, you're not going to get good at understanding complementarity.
True.
But if you're observing like a transition from a classic farm system to a regenerative farm system, you're going to get really good at understanding complementarity and reciprocity if you look at the whole process through that lens. I think a lot of the loops that we need to instantiate in economy and development processes of anything have a lot to do with those patterns. So if you shift what you're looking for and what you're looking at, you will see them. And that's one of the foundational principles of true human and of enlightenment, which is like the spiritual path of a true human, is that the concepts are readily available when you put your attention on the things that perpetuate living processes. So as opposed to put your attention on what will refine, heroin into what will refine the opium into the heroin, into the even more refined painkiller. It's like putting your attention on anything that expands complementarities and reciprocities and diversity and possibility within a system. And it's like Humpty Dumpty actually getting put back together again.
So reversing entropy, effectively.
Collaborating with it in a much more extended way.
Okay.
I don't think you're reversing. I mean, certainly,
you're not reversing, but you're
slowing
doing
down multiple hyper-entropic processes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Coming back to this idea of separation, because you talk about it sort of this great separation began. It sounds like around the time that civilization began, when we first left our hunter-gatherer communities and started agriculture. We were plowing, we invented currency, this kind of stuff. That is what you define as the sort of starting moment of the great separation. I think it's if I understand it correctly, you're not saying that separation was a bad thing. It was this sort of just this natural process, essentially, of humans becoming this emergent feature that kickstarted our civilization, which obviously, I think, because many people listening to this will probably be thinking, yeah, but civilization's great. And it is, to be abundantly clear. Look at this. We're talking into these funny little black things, which are cables going to the camera. And you guys, wherever you are around the world, thousands of you are hearing this. We would not have done that without the separation.
Super cool.
So yeah, perhaps you can talk about a bit more deeply to what this idea of separation is. It sounds essentially like the Kickstarter technology. And in what ways what is an example of good separation versus bad? Or what stage are we trying to get to whereby it is clearly a good thing?
I mean, separation gets pathological as soon as you believe in the separability. In other words, that I'm separate from you and that anything I would say would not harm you. Or that that my poop doesn't go somewhere when I flush the toilet.
I see.
Yeah, we've created a world that obscures connectivity very actively, that death won't touch me. That I can live in a sort of bubble of endless use or endless the possibility to buy whatever I want, and there's no touch to the implications of any of those actions. We've reified an experience of separation in a way that actually has a ton of harm, a ton of upstream and downstream harm. As soon as if you take that really seriously and you allow yourself to open to that to being true, you can engage the tools of separation, like doing great research on factory farming, which is specifically engage, and you're engaging that in a lot of different ways to address factory farming. You can address factory farming with the tools of separability, with statistics, with research. You can also address it with the tools of connectivity, which are storytelling and experiences, and engaging and using statistics to generate a bigger, more wide boundary story. Right? That's a dance between them that we use all the time. And to put that in an orientation where the goal is less suffering. Yeah. And greater human health. Like as soon as you really go in the direction of interbeing, in the direction of interdependence and connectivity, the outcome is usually more robustness, more health, less suffering. And the outcome is almost always a wide boundary. It has a wide boundary aspect to it. Because when you reinstantiate, you use those tools to start to reinstantiate reciprocal loops, you end up with these outcomes that are bigger than like a one-shot target.
Another thing you've talked about as a sort of the differentiator between kind of the old way, the current way, and this evolution we need to go through to become a better version of ourselves is to do with power. You describe the current system as something which is about power over life. And we need to level up essentially into viewing our power as the power of life. So can you explain a bit more what that means? Because it's quite a subtle distinction.
Sure. I mean, you start from the insight that life is very powerful. Life is actually way more powerful than we think. It doesn't, we look at power in terms of agents and action and outcomes. Life is doing life. Oceans are breathing. trees are inhaling our exhale. There's an immense, like if you think, you have to get deeper in a definition of power is what is power? And there's a human definition that is largely currently oriented around who gets to the top of a ladder, and or who gets the most work done. But there's a deeper pulse that's occurring to make that game possible, which is like a pulse of living processes that is not dependent on the human game. It could be it could be halted by the human game, it could be extinguished by the human game and the AI game. It's arguable about whether that would get that far. Because we could end up in various horizons where like even AI couldn't function in the context of a biosphere that's darkened, for example. We don't know. Would it still be able to extract energy and do its things? We don't know. But it's like the power that made a star, the power that made a planet. There is a deeper, more whole, more totalizing ways that power moves in the universe than just this little human game thing, which is just a blip in cosmic time. So that's where you have to start with, like, kind of thinking about this conversation, is that there's some, like, wait, hold on. Like, we're playing, King of the Universe on a planet where we're about 2/3 of the way through like the normal, or like halfway through the normal arc of a mammalian existence. Like a normal mammalian existence is something like 50 million years. I don't know that I have that stat correct. Probably
it's on that order,
but it's not that long, and we're a very young species doing this thing, and we're like, this is power. And so the beginning of that conversation is like, okay, chill the fuck out on your homocentrism and anthropocentrism and win-win, win-lose gameism. And get curious about what's actually occurring to make any of that possible. So when I say power over life versus power of life, like it's again, it's about this reorientation of attention to like breaking miraculous processes. Like the fact that we're this is miraculous. It's also miraculous that we're cognizing each other's words, that like water is transducing membranes, like breakfast is still digesting. I mean, that's all freaking miraculous. And I feel like we're at a moment in time where, we're like zooming towards AGI with this very narrow definition of intelligence and of work that hasn't like paused again to like, civilization has not absorbed the insights of ecology. Civilization has not like really absorbed. I mean, there's amazing biologists and ecologists, Susan Simard, that would be a really fun interview. Janine Benyus, so many people, we just lost Jane Goodall, and the whole world wept because she was an embodiment of the study of this other power. And she was so good at it because she respected it so much. She was like an avatar of this attunement, this curiosity to the deeper flows of communication and information and possibility that are flowing all the time, that we're just so focused on getting a thing done. Which doesn't mean that that's a bad thing to do. It's one of our superpowers as a species. It's just that it's going to extinct us if we don't also do the other thing. So the power of life is like the great aggregate fabric of all that makes reality possible on a material and energetic and information level, and becoming a deeper both student and collaborator to that.
It sounds, I'm feeling like it somewhat represents the sort of classic divine feminine, divine masculine in some ways, right?
Yes.
Because what is the feminine? It's the womb, it's the nurturer, it's the community. Those are like classically more feminine things. The women are the ones who often, will hold the community together. Or at least, it's a combination. It's a dance of both. And also the feminine aspects of men can help do that. It's not exclusive. And again, similarly, like the more masculine trait is go and explore, expand the boundary, go find, bring things, push the frontier. Wonderful as well. We have needed that to get to where we are. But, personally, it feels like the balance has been a little out of whack. We've built systems that perpetuate the masculine urge to keep, expand, grow, build, extract, always, looking for the next thing, not to be satiated, and neglected the systems that support the feminine, which is there to like actually then make those things stay sustainable. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I would. And I also think, you can leverage goal orientation in a more life-centric way. Like if you put the goal of mothers and children being healthy globally, just that one goal, it involves a massively wide boundary spectrum of things. But if we made that the game globally, we would end up in a really different game. Or like, I love the new definition of billionaire. That's a great definition. You could totally leverage competition towards that kind of a goal. Putting mothers and children at the center is probably, it's what I call a non-arbitrary goal. It like puts something that is biologically coherent at the center of the goal. It's biologically and psychologically coherent at the center of the goal in terms of the persistence of the well-being of the living system.
What would be some good ways to try and center mothers and children? Like what incentives would we build? Or like what are some low-hanging fruit?
Low-hanging fruit, really like organic food programs for mothers and babies. Education, prenatal education, education on fathering. The list is kind of endless, and there's a lot of innovation that's already been pioneered in that space, because it turns out that it's actually kind of a sub-pulse. If you look at the history of social entrepreneurialism, a lot of people kind of figured out this hack that if there's a business called Indigenous that works with women in Peru and has them knit all the sweaters and the things. And the insight there was that if you're generating income for the women, that they will tend the whole village. And that has played out to be statistically true really consistently.
That's also true with like some of the charities we've supported in like Give Directly, for example, found if you directly transfer money to women in villages, it goes so much further than usually giving it to the men. Yeah. Because the women are like, well, I got to feed my baby. And again, not always, but yeah, it tends to be that they'll tend the nest first.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think we need and we get to redefine like what is masculine power. I think masculine power can be defined as protection and conservation and the incredible engineering genius that it takes to redo material and energetic loops in our technosphere and in our economy. That's badass. We could redefine progress and say like there's really deep progress when we see when circularity increases, when entropy decreases, when there's greater, the greatest national happiness model of Bhutan is also a really potent model. They plant like 2 or 3 trees for every baby, and their forests have increased in size. And there's brilliant. There's so many really obvious things, but that also can engage the masculine in a way where it's not emasculating. Like I think what happens sometimes in this conversation that is a really deep problem is that the feminine becomes empowered and then the masculine ends up emasculated. And I think in a really human, deeply human version of this, absolutely both men and women can embody these kind of like feminine qualities, and like there's a masculine role for protection. There's a masculine role for being the kind of the container on that, so that there's structural integrity to it. And I don't think we have developmental narratives for that yet. The woman who developed like Moana and some of the other recent movies in Disney for the feminine empowerment narrative is a friend of mine. And one of the problems they've seen is that raised a generation of girls with a lot of purpose and boys who feel really purposeless. And so we definitely need those narratives and those models in the world.
Yeah, I do feel, I'm a fan of like Ken Wilber and his like integral theory work, and he talks about these different levels of development of a society, of a civilization, and during the, I guess, the sort of scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, that was what he would call sort of the orange phase was largely like very masculine dominated. That's where you got like the finance institutions and all these things, and GDP number went up, great. And then as a response out of that, you got the green movement, which was like, okay, great, we've got all this orange stuff, but there's a toxic side to the orange where we're getting rivers on fire because there's so much pollution, and nuclear weapons are being tested and like wiping out whole communities in the atolls in the Pacific, and there's now radiation left over, and so that came as a sort of counterbalance to orange going too far. And now I feel, so we're sort of at the tail end of the excesses of what I would call the woke movement, where that was green going too far, where it actually, you would get very anti-human policies, people trying to force their ideologies. Like, I'm a supporter of trans rights, but I don't think that you should be trying to enforce those ideologies on young children. I think that's, again, because it's disenfranchising actually parents and children. It's society trying to do a thing. And there are other examples of that. It's like the mean side of, because orange is more of a masculine, green is more of a feminine response. And I think what you're speaking to there is, again, it's like that you start to get the disenfranchised, the masculine becomes disenfranchised. That's when you get things go really, really bad as well. So yeah, what are, and actually, so we mentioned Moloch earlier. I don't think we need to define Moloch. Most people watching this will know what it is. Moloch to me is a sort of because if it's the demon of competition gone too far, that's a very masculine energy. Right. It's like, we must win at all costs, crush our enemies. Very masculine thing. So I was like, well, what's its opposite? And obviously win-win is this sort of philosophy born out of like, how do we defeat Moloch? But I realized there's a counter side to Moloch, which is like the other end of the spectrum, which is not enough competition, which is this, we must have safety, no freedom for anybody, sort of bureaucracy, red tape. And we need a character for that. And I know her name now. She's female. Her name is Norma.
She's not like totalitarian or authoritarian.
Yeah, she can be that. But I think she needs a more like, that's too sort of whimsical. Her name is Norma, and she does not like you playing your little games without her approval. You need to come and get sign off and her stamp, and she probably won't give it to you. So she's very gray and like annoying sort of school mom that's completely unreasonable. And so she's like, that's the opposite side of Moloch. And I think it's important to talk about that. Because I don't want people to think, we have to defend against the toxic masculine and the toxic feminine. Right. So I'm curious if you have any sort of thoughts. I don't know, just like want to riff on that.
I mean, I think the models, in my little microcosm, which includes a lot of Indigenous work with various Indigenous traditions and ceremony work in both Indigenous traditional way and also in sort of mestizo, the blend. Mestizo means someone in Latin America who's blended with like Indigenous and Western. So mestizo tradition is a tradition that blends influences from the West with influences from indigenous traditions. And there's like so many incredible examples of profoundly powerful masculine in those spaces. I've also been a permaculturalist. I almost married a seed farmer, like, who was a direct plaintiff against Monsanto.
Oh, wow.
Like badass warriors who are protecting life. In a ceremonial context, it's like showing up to like anchor the truth and the clarity and the reflection of no bullshit humanness, and like also pull people up off the floor, mop their shit up, like psychically, of like, grow the fuck up. And this is what it looks like to be an adult. It's like, there's so many examples of it. Those examples, by and large, are not people. One of the challenges is that we also live in a media ecology where it's like either the two major narratives that are available are like sociopathic, kind of evil narratives of various kinds. Some of them are very psychological, but they're still like sociopath porn.
Like what?
What's the one at the resort? It's like White Lotus.
Oh, right.
Right? Like they're not clinical, but they're like it's a great example of the kind of drama that is like very normative right now. It's like you're watching a bunch of people who are like all on the spectrum of various clinical descriptions. And it's like, it's a porn. It's a kind of porn. It's psychological porn. And that's like sociopath porn. But like the dominant narrative that we're embedded in still is the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is about like the heroic process of like discovering who you are. Yeah, the people I'm talking about also went through massively interesting journeys, but I write about this a bit in the book. I'm going to write a Substack about it shortly, about an epochal shift from the hero's journey as the primary narrative that we're living out to the kinship journey. And the kinship journey begins when you realize that disconnection is a problem. So like my amazing seed farmer X, he had sort of a similar realization growing up as I did, and chose as a really brilliant, like hyper capable person to become a farmer and a permaculturalist and a seed farmer and like learn how to tend land and watersheds and seeds. And like growing seeds is the ultimate archetype of infinite game play, because you're growing that which creates food for everybody, and you're collaborating with that to create greater deliciousness and nutrition. And it's super cool. I love saving seeds. I love growing seeds. If we weren't at the moment we were, I would be doing that. But I'm not. Long story short is to say, like, the men I know who embody the divine masculine and embody the potency of what it is to be a man in this world, they're all people who've taken a kinship journey. Like they realized at some level, like the classic shaman's initiation is getting really sick and like deathly ill, and realizing that you have to connect with all your powers in the way that they serve life to actually heal yourself. But the purpose of healing yourself isn't just to heal yourself, it's to become a vehicle of a power that serves life. That's like an archetypal classic shamanic initiation.
Like they actually get sick intentionally?
Is that what, like, not intent? No, it's often like in a lot of, I am hesitant to say a lot of, because I have my spectrum of anthropological knowledge, and there's a lot of ones generalization heaped on indigenous traditions, and they're really diverse. But the classic shaman's journey is that like a kid like is so sick that they can't get out of bed and no one knows why, or gets hit by lightning, or like there's many different kind of doorways in the Kogi tradition. Elders identify that a kid has gifts, and then the kid is often raised in complete darkness for up to 7 years, up to 12 years, usually 7. And that cultivates like the DMT capacity in the brain. They actually learn how to see literally see in the dark. That's the classic initiation there. In the lion shamanism tradition that I have a little bit of initiation into, like classically a lion would come to you and consume you in your dreams, which often actually leads to like some kind of illness. And that identifies that you're on the path to be initiated in that way.
So these are all kind of relating to the hero's journey.
They're relating to the kinship journey. Okay. Because in all of these cases, there's a recognition in I would say my worldview as well. There's a recognition that the intelligences at play are greater than me. And that there's a way in which my life begins to make sense when I true myself, to go back to this definition of true, with a pattern that is seeking to be born through me, with a path of humanness that's seeking to be born through me. So for me, like I've received all these visions in psychedelic ceremonies. I've received these dreams. I received from the first time I had an elder come up to me and say, oh, you're a teacher of teachers and you come from the future and you need to, develop that.
When was that?
I was 18.
Oh, wow.
And I had this, elder come up to me and say, I know who you are and you're a teacher of teachers and you need to develop your gifts. And I've had experiences like that over the course of my life. All of those live in a context where the worldview assumes that there's some purposefulness to my incarnation, to this one's like purpose here on this earth, or your purpose on this earth, that somehow included like frickin' mastering the game. And the recognition there is, as you develop that in service to life, like you're a great example of someone who has developed those capacities in service to life. That's the process of kinship initiation into a sense of identity that is organized ecologically in terms of the soul ecology, or the ecology of human actors within the larger ecology of a planetary system.
So would an example be like if the hero's journey is, our hero Bob goes out, overcomes some challenge, discovers something new about the world, comes back and sort of comes full circle. That's a classic story circle, but changed and upgraded. The kinship story would be what happens to Bob after and how he like integrates that into his community.
It would start with the why.
I see. It would be the why.
The why you go on the journey in the first place.
I see.
But and the self-development would be somewhat similar, but it would be a bit more permeable. So it would be less oriented towards like my increased sense of heroism in the world to my more available and permeable sense of collaboration with the world, where I have some unique gifts to give. And then the other thing that's different is absolutely the thing that you do afterward. The end is different in that the hero's journey often culminates with a victory that looks really good in a win-lose system. Where the kinship journey doesn't end in that kind of a victory. It might end in a ceremony where you finally get to give your gifts. And then the continuity of that is that you're now a student to that now. And you're still, it's like a parent's journey is more of a kinship journey. The journey of becoming a parent is the journey that a lot of people know, because it's a deep sublimation, like softening and opening of your ego structure to be in service to another being and to their future. So like anyone who's a parent is already to some degree on a kinship journey relative to their child, but they may not be on that journey relative to their work or relative to transforming our world.
Right.
Anyone who's already raised their hand as a change agent, who's like, I'm interested in being a change agent, has in some ways signified that they're on a kinship journey. Because that recognition that there wants to be change is a recognition that there's something fragmented or toxic or pathological or problematic. You're interviewing a lot of people who might more greatly understand their own process a lot more deeply in terms of personal development if they look at it through a kinship lens.
Are there any movies that you would say that's a kinship story?
I haven't watched Moana or those movies. I think to
I
some
haven't seen them
degree they
either.
are. Ted Lasso is to some degree a kinship journey. It's also an interesting narrative structure because it's more about the group process. It's important not to confuse. The kinship journey is still an individual journey. It's the journey of the individual relative to our kinship relationships with an animate world, a world that is intelligent, that we fit into in increasingly elegant ways. But there's also like journeys that are collective, and Ted Lasso is a great example of that. I think I don't have a good example. It's a good homework assignment.
You mentioned an animate world. You believe in animism, right? That there is essentially a quality of life to almost all things.
Yeah, I'm not a believer really in anything, but I experience intelligence in many things. I'm not a big believer of anything, but I'm a big observer. And I observe that things are intelligent. I observe different qualities of intelligence. For example, going into an old growth forest. And like, if you just get quiet and feel, there's a palpable sense of something different. You know, if you're honest, you probably don't give it a lot of words. You probably just get quiet because the sonic quality of an old growth forest is totally different than other forests. That sonic quality mirrors a whole bunch of very different relational processes that are going on in an old growth forest, down to the soil and the space between the trees and the kind of organisms who inhabit it, from a third growth forest.
Why is that?
I mean, bioacoustics is a growing area of research in the world that's totally freaking gorgeous. Sidebar, my favorite bioacoustic factoid is that baby coral, little tiny little polyps like babies, find where to settle on the basis of the sound that healthy coral makes. What? Like, it turns out the ocean is this like massive, like the bioacoustics of ocean, and there's all this communication going on that we're just starting to even understand is even occurring, let alone map in terms of bioacoustics. I
mean, it makes sense that a living coral, I mean, it's in a medium of water.
Yeah.
Sound travels great in water, actually. And, you know, coral is essentially, I mean, it doesn't breathe in the conventional sense, right? But there's cyclical processes going on, right?
Yeah.
So that creates a sound, it creates a rhythm.
Yeah. And baby coral finds it.
Wow.
Itself finds its way home on the basis of that sound. I can't speak to the specific bioacoustics of a forest, of an old growth forest, but I can speak to feeling how different the acoustic space is than when you walk into a second growth or a third growth space. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is just spatial. One of them is that there's different statistical gradients of kinds of intelligence moving between different things. The more complex an ecosystem is, the more intelligences are moving back and forth between things. I mean, I can also speak to experiences of being a bird or being a spider, or
go on.
This is getting very woo, but perhaps the first time I had an experience of inhabiting the ontology, like the entire way of being of another being, was very unbidden. I had hiked out very far into Long Valley in Sedona and hiked up a cliff, got in a cave, sat down to like contemplate, and got very relaxed. And then all of a sudden I found myself inside a bird. This was sober, totally sober.
When you say inside a bird, like
my consciousness had transmigrated into the bird. There's languages for this in like Carlos Castaneda and things. It's called transmigrating.
But essentially,
I can't technically tell you about that. I can tell you
like remote. Some people, I think, remote viewing is a word people use.
Yeah,
or like,
it's more like the experience of this organismic experience of being here was not here. It was there.
Right. And could you feel its body?
Yes.
Were you like seeing through its eyes?
Seeing through its eyes and like zooming through the wind and like being super fluid, and its eyes are like like they're on different sides of its head. It's a totally
How did your brain process that?
It did. And then I was back in my body.
How long were you in it for?
That was probably 10 seconds. And I've had experiences on ayahuasca of becoming a bear and becoming a spider and becoming a mosquito.
What was that like?
It's freaking cool. It's like being inside a VR experience. Well, firstly, mosquitoes don't differentiate as an individual, so you don't have a sense of being an individual. And then you're like surfing smell heat waves, and your visual spectrum is more in the spectrum of heat. So it's like very amorphous and very global, and like your whole your agency is oriented towards surfing these waves towards where there's heat and possibility. Whoa.
Did you, because the mosquitoes are the one creature I just like. I try not to kill anything, but I do kill a mosquito.
Yeah,
just, like,
I do too.
Get the fuck out of
They
my
told me this was not the mosquito ontology. This was more like me popping back in my body and talking to the soul of mosquitoes. So I was like, what are you for? This happened in an ayahuasca journey where I had gone very, very deep into the medicine, and I was like basically on the other side of life and death for about 5 hours, and learning a lot about what consciousness does when it's not located in a body, which is pretty cool. And
well, let's stick a pin in that. But anyway, keep going.
So I had gone into mosquito ontology, again, fairly non-differentiated, and then came out and like asked the question, what are you for? And the mosquitoes said, this was all instigated by asking that question prior to the ceremony. I don't know if you work with ayahuasca, but ayahuasca is very responsive to intention in a way no other medicine is. And so I'd asked that question, and then I asked them, and they were like, well, you see, I know we're kind of a pain in the ass and we're a disease vector, but we also help you tend your microvirome. Like if you think we have a microbiome, we also have a microvirome, and mosquitoes help keep that robust and diverse. And they also give us microinfections, which it turns out strengthens our immune system. This was their rationale. But it has changed my relationship with mosquitoes. It's been fascinating.
I also heard that they, especially in the like higher latitudes, like up in Canada where they're like so prolific, they're a very important transfer of energy from lower latitudes to the poles or vice versa. But because there's like literal life energy, because if you think how much blood they are sucking, apparently like if you were, because I know, people who've looked into like gene drives and so on to wipe out like the malaria causing ones, the worst culprits. And actually this would be an interesting thing to, I'm sure you have opinions on this, but like it might be okay to take out a couple of species of the worst offenders. But if we were to take out the entire like cluster of mosquitoes in general, it would probably collapse the entire ecosystem, the biosphere, because they're such an important, again, they literally move energy in a way that the system relies on. Again, classic like complex systems. You think, oh, I can just take these little bits out, but actually sometimes it's a house of cards, and you take out a thing that didn't seem like it was relevant, but actually it causes mass changes that it can't. The shock is too much for it to absorb.
So when I say animacy, that would be a great example of a flow of intelligences that is part of what that means to me. So I don't just mean like, oh, that thing talks to me, though there are trees that talk to me, and I find that very interesting. But I think, to me, animacy is a lens that takes the communications between things and the incredible complexity of living processes very seriously as intelligent, and then may cultivate relationships with that in all kinds of different ways. Or with an ecofield. An ecofield means an a field. So like this room is an eco field. Your house is located in an eco field that includes your yard and the kind of all the flows that comes through this zone. So you could also cultivate an animate relationship with an eco field.
So you've had a lot of these unusual consciousness experiences, going into a bird, going into a bear, mosquito, talking to trees. I would love to personally cultivate that kind of thing. I'm sure some people listening, I mean, we might have lost a few people by this point.
I'm sure.
And that's okay.
It's okay.
That's fine. If you're still with us, you're presumably curious to learn how to expand your consciousness in a similar way. So, like, have you noticed any, do you teach, are these experiences teachable to others? Is there a way to access them without, very high doses of psychedelics, which understandably a lot of people wouldn't want to do? Have you found there's like do these always happen by surprise, or have you actually cultivated the ability to do it like a muscle?
There's a muscle, the muscle that I've cultivated is a muscle of approaching anything relationally. In other words, like there's the tree outside my bedroom window that's behind my house that feels, I honor that tree as a sheltering tree for our house. That's not a complicated thing to do. It's like not at all complicated. I just like the tree. The tree has never actually talked to me, so any conversation that I would be having with the tree is more a function of my own mind. I think that it's really useful to be honest about that. Real mysticism has that as a deep level of rigor. So there's two things that are really relevant to cultivating these skills, and then there's various trainings and traditions that like meet the energy field of the tree, and I wouldn't pretend to be actually very good at those things. But there's two things that are really helpful, and one is to take the view that thing might be intelligent. So you have to suspend the belief that it is not intelligent, that it is an inanimate thing, or, materialism is an interesting spectrum of beliefs. It's not just one belief. So you can be a materialist and be open to the intelligence of the tree, or you could be a materialist and like kind of, that's just raw material, and have a very rigid kind of fundamentalist view of stacking processes. I think it's actually more rigorous, whether you're a materialist or not, to approach the tree from the inquiry. Might it have intelligence? Might there be ways in which it's communicating? Might I be able to interact with some of those? Might I be unable to interact with some of those, or unable to measure some of those? Those are really rigorous inquiries. They're honest. And those could yield all kinds of results. Might the tree over time respond to me having a kind story about it? Might I change because I have a kind story about the tree? Then there's another layer, which is like suspending the disbelief. It's called suspension of disbelief. You suspend the belief that a communication would be possible. You just stay open. I think, but what's interesting about that, and I think this is true, is you have to stay really rigorous. Our imagination likes to fill in the blank really quickly. That can also be okay. I could say, I imagine this amazing conversation with this tree, and it's really rich for me, and it's a way that I cultivate this like amazing relationship with this tree. But if I'm rigorous, I would say, I've never heard the voice of the tree. This was different than my experience of the mosquito oversoul who actually did communicate with me. It was very palpable. I was like, never would have thought of that. So
it didn't just sound like a voice in your head.
It wasn't
like your own voice.
It wasn't a voice in my head. It was like words in my head. Like it wasn't like the mosquitoes are speaking to me, but it was like a transmission that was linguistic. It was very clear.
Do you have like a regular meditation practice?
I do. Yeah.
Every day?
Most days, not every day. Most days. Most days I meditate for 10 to 20 minutes. I would say meditation for me as a practice it's very much about what I like to call zero pointing. I'm a student of Mahamudra, which is an evolution of Dzogchen and Tibetan Buddhism. It's like a lineage of no lineages. Dustin DePerna is a teacher of that. He's also a collaborator with Ken Wilber. And there's two dimensions of what is really meaningful to me in meditation practice. And one is like the kind of contacting what I call no self. A lot of the traditions call it self, capital S, but contacting this space as consciousness, like connecting consciousness to itself, which also has to do with in the practice of Mahamudra, you identify the emptiness of your construct of self, and you also identify the emptiness of your affect of self. So you do two kind of entry point scans, and one is going through like pleasure, pain, like all of our feelings, like grumpiness or sleepiness, or are all affectual things in the body. So you can scan through all of your body affect and identify it as empty, which is basically like with suspending disbelief about the belief that it has meaning. But you like establish its emptiness. It's like, oh, it's a field of sensation. And then you also do the same thing with your self stories. I'm nervous about this podcast today. I need to do really great. I should be hurrying right now. Whatever. You know, you kind of like, you scan your mind and you establish it all as empty. And that creates a context where it's very easy to attend to awareness or attend to the breath. Those are two different meditations. And I do, depending on how concentrated I am, which sometimes is lousy. If I lousy concentration, I focus on the breath. If I really great concentration, then you kind of can penetrate the breath and put awareness on awareness. And the outcome of that is also really regulating. So my meditation practice is both kind of a touch in every day with what I perceive as a deep truth, that there's like consciousness at the heart of everything, including me. And it's not actually that complex to contact it. And then there's also a regulatory function, like when turns out that that's really good for your brain and it regulates the nervous system, and all of those reasons why mindfulness has become a thing are true. And so that's where my meditation practice lies. And then my other like kind of daily, weekly practice is getting out into nature and hiking and having time in nature, dancing. I think play is a practice. I mean, I think of life as a practice. I make prayers. Prayer to me is an art of offering a clear intent with surrender. It's like you don't have to believe in God. It's kind of like, to some degree, consciousness is talking to consciousness. I offer this ripple of my clear intent. Over time, that seems like it yields very excellent results. They're really win-winny for me. And then I work with plant medicine, and that's increasingly rare. There was a time in my life when I did a lot of psychedelic ceremony, and that helped me move through trauma, helped me repattern myself relationally, helped me verify a map of the universe that was already pretty complete. Like, I think a lot of people go to psychedelics because they want to understand reality. I actually think that's kind of a lousy approach. It's a you can collaborate with it, but if you outsource it to psychedelics, it yields to delusion. So it's a great vehicle to collaborate with all kinds of other inquiry into your own experience, inquiry into your own intuition, inquiry into all of the scientific and mathematical ways we might penetrate reality as well, and running those back and forth. I could say a lot more about that, but I think that's enough.
So For people who want to become more true human, or to help bring about what sounds like this shift in consciousness that we need to do, like, is there a sort of 80-20 piece of advice you can give? Whether it is a daily practice or a mantra or something like that.
Yeah.
The viewers can start to just be practicing, or someone like me can start practicing.
Totally. I think the 80-20 move has to do with the kinship journey. And it's about recognizing that there's something that's calling to you to serve. And, the work you're doing with factory farming is an example of that. It may be more of a project along a path where your thing to serve is win-win and win-winism. Mm-hmm. It's more like a project along the path. That could look like responding to something that you have immense grief about, or anger or frustration, or it could look like working on safety for whales. It could look like reconfiguring, like helping people to actually get through the toxicity and like move out of the toxicity in their food, make better food choices. It could look like what Wes Carter is doing with the packaging supply chain. It could look like something, it can have, like I said earlier, it can have 8 billion different ways of moving. But the thing is what is calling you on a kindred level. In Hawaiian, the word is amakua. It's like, what is your, it's a different word than totem, because it's not just your totem. It's like the thing that calls you that you also are called to serve. So it's like, if the honu, the turtle, calls you, then there's something about you that is turtle-like, and you're learning about what it is to carry like that depth of prehistoric, like cosmic consciousness. But you are also being tasked to care for the fisheries and the coral reefs. Or it's like the forest that you absolutely loved growing up that is under threat. Or it could be that you're a technologist and you have kids and you want the kids to have an awesome future. So you get curious about these kinds of reciprocal and complementary loops in technology, technological process. It lives at the intersection of your gifts and the things you want to serve, or that call you to serve them. So that move, like as a like cultivation of kinship, I think is the 80-20 move. And what's cool is you can be playful about it. You could be project-based about it. And then those things kind of lead along a path. And I think that's the 80-20 move.
I want to pivot now to talking about our technology stack. And because, one of the things, sort of gleaning from what you wrote, you acknowledge that technology is, again, has been in many ways a blessing. It has gotten us to where it is, gotten us to this wonderful civilization. At the same time, it's almost taken on a life of its own. This idea of like the machine. Often when we talk about Moloch, it's like Moloch and the machine, right? There's this like, I guess the sort of the economic process, our economic system is almost something serving its own ends, and it feels like it lacks under its current instantiation the wisdom to know when it's going too far. The counter argument that I often hear from, say, accelerationists and so on is, two things. First of all, they believe that we can just build our way through. We're at this dangerous point. Yes, they acknowledge that things are precarious, but technology will be the answer to all our prayers, and we just have to do more technology faster to get through this current crisis. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But also, there's an argument I often hear that it's kind of feels a little sort of sleight of handy, but they're like, well, technology comes from us. We're part of nature, so isn't technology a part of nature? So I'm curious on your thoughts on both of those.
Yeah. The way I look at it, I think there's some base level clarity around definitions that needs to be established before you can have the conversation. we've insinuated metaphors of mechanical world onto biological world. You have to start by pulling those metaphors out and recognizing that a human organism is a human organism. It's not a machine. The brain is a brain that co-evolved in transcontextual process over billions of years of evolution. It's not a machine. The apple you're eating, grew in an ecosystem. It is dependent. The apple existing is dependent on the ecological processes that make the apple possible, that are all reciprocal flows of water and nutrients and sunlight, and biological things live and die. Their bodies return to nature as resource for the living system. There is metabolic parity in that. This is the key distinction around technosphere versus biosphere, is that mechanical technological processes are built by makers who want to achieve a goal. And to make those things, those makers extract things, very particular things, out of the biosphere, out of biological and geological process, and put them together, and they then harvest more energy to supercharge those things with energy that would otherwise be part of either in the ground or part of the overall metabolic process of the biosphere without technology. Technology is a totally different metabolic process, like the then biological process. It's also a different evolutionary process that is oriented towards achieving goals by a maker who has mastered subject-object way of knowing to achieve outcomes. AI is a little different because it can achieve broad outcomes, but it doesn't change the fact that it's an emergent property of these extractive metabolic processes. That's a really, really key insight. And I don't think you can have this conversation in a rigorous way without that foundational insight. You cannot have a mature conversation. You can have a word salad, but you can't have a real conversation. So that's foundational. Then you can debate whether technology is an emergence of nature or not. It does not matter. I would say it's linguistically clean to say it's not, because its metabolic and biophysical impact and imprint and its evolutionary process is totally different than what nature does. Nature always, nothing arises or persists in nature without it finding a cohesive place within an ecological process over time. That has to be selected over time, over many generations. Nothing in nature trees were a waste material until organisms came along that, could metabolize cellulose. Maybe organisms will come along that can metabolize plastic. There's metabolize PFAS. Maybe not. Those kinds of fluorine bonds don't exist anywhere in biology. And I'm that's a very interesting, if I were God and I was looking at this process over another 80 million years, super curious what's going to happen. Because life is really persistent.
Right.
And of course, there's an argument to make that silicon is life, blah, 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 but it is not what our technosphere did not emerge through biological process. It emerged through process that only subject, object, creator, preserver, destroyer beings such as ourselves, can create. And so then you can have a conversation about what constitutes technological maturity. I'm a techno-optimist. I think that there are ways that we will build our way out of this. I think that the conversation is irrelevant unless we look at two fundamental things. One are the game theoretics embedded in the system, which you've already spent a lot of time talking about with a lot of interviewees. And then the other is the fundamental orientation towards metabolic parity or metabolic reciprocity, or a decrease in overall entropy that is more harmonized with biospheric process and with psycho-emotional process as the goal, right? Like, I like how light phones are like a small instantiation of that, of like, let's design phones where you can do all the basic things you need to do in a phone, but not designed for the addiction. Like it's a very small and very incomplete example. Again, like I keep bringing up the packaging supply chain. Packaging is a really cool place to play because it touches every other material product. So you can look at a very wide boundary, developmental process around how do we generate circularity here. You can look at agriculture and you can say, how could we eat meat in a way that isn't causing massive animal suffering and isn't continuing deforestation? And what would that, like, if we reverse engineered that in terms of how much, I like thinking in terms of like a ecovore diet, and what would that look like on a planetary scale? Like, what would be the realistic numbers to like actually have relatively regenerative meat production for most of the humans who want meat? And what would that look like as a diet? Those are ways to ask those questions where those are technological and economic questions. They're design questions, and we have to ask the right questions.
What are your thoughts on like something like space exploration as a way of like easing off the pressure? Because I know I feel like some people in the conscious community are very against it because they view it as like running away from our problems. It's looking outward instead of looking inward. We need to be, it's just another instantiation of like the masculine urge to like expand and, find new things and always look outwards. At the same time, I do think, I personally am very aligned. I think it's important. I think there's tons of space and stuff out there that can be used if we can figure out how to harvest asteroids instead of plundering the earth for minerals. That would be great. But I'm curious, like, where does that fit into your worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a real turnaround on that inquiry. I went through a many-year phase of just being really pissed off at, like, we don't need a Mars shot, we need an Earth shot. And we do need an Earth shot, a lot of different Earth shots. But I've really come around full circle to feeling like there's all kinds of reasons why space exploration is awesome, including, the overview effect, and that people who go to space consistently fall in love with this planet as like we know about the overview effect. But also that the kind of innovation that is necessary for space travel is incredibly useful. There's incredibly useful horizons for innovation.
So we got solar panels.
So we're trying to figure out like how to create a contained human environment on Mars. Like that could end up being, if applied to agriculture in the context of the climate dysregulation that's coming our way, like that science is going to be really useful. I mean, we are going to need to do a lot of indoor agriculture if we want to survive, because like what's heading our way is gnarly. And, even with the IPCC reports, and now James Hansen has said like it's 10 times worse.
Oh, geez, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I mean, the lead scientist who like pioneered all that science has said like, oh, like what you're looking at is nothing compared to what's actually going to happen. Came out a couple months ago. I haven't gone deep into that. It would be too depressing, to be frank. But I think it's a beautiful story. I think for those of us, I don't think I have any power in that story. But for those of us who are involved in that story, it's like, why not weave that story as an and? It's such a great and story. I don't know if we're ever going to like live happy lives on Mars. It doesn't sound like a happy life in any way, shape, or form, but like the development process is like incredibly useful. I think we have to get honest. I mean, there's layers. It's like the amount of pollution that happens in the name of space travel is extraordinary. And it's a very, very high carbon, very high resource process. I think it's useful to be honest about that. But I think that the innovation process is really useful for a lot of reasons. It can be very useful Earth side. It could be, I agree with you about the asteroids. Yeah.
And as well, I think there is value in having space to dream big.
I think so too. I
you
agree.
know, like I've always thought that if we knew that there's a permanent colony on the moon, that especially ahead of Mars, which we don't see all the time and is much smaller in the sky, if everyone would look up and know that there was a colony on the moon, which is filled with, like, let's say someone, astronauts from every continent, what a unifying effect. And every single day it comes up and people are like, oh wow, there's humans up there.
Yeah.
I think that as a sort of like both being a sense of pride for our species, but also as a reminder of like, oh look, we're so small, know. I don't know, I think there's like this perspective shift that would come from that.
Yeah.
When was the last, like, whatever your views on the moon landings, people knowing that like that the whole world watched that, having these whole world events are such a unifying force that we don't really have anymore. That's one of the things we've lost with the on-demand TV.
Right.
It used to be everyone would watch, in the UK, everyone would watch the 9 o'clock news, or like, oh, did you see the episode of, the finale of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or whatever was like the cultural phenomenon at the time for us. We'd all come into school and we'd all talk about that thing that happened last night. And we've lost that.
Completely.
And like that synchronicity has become such a rare resource. The Super Bowl, like there's a reason why they can charge millions of dollars for an ad. Why? Because, finally you know that everyone's got their eyes on that thing at that one time.
Yeah.
And people will talk about it. And something like, these big global engineering projects, the first time that we do send a human to Mars or wherever, or get boots, well, let's start smaller, get boots on the moon again, like those will be so global of a moment where it's like, oh wow, we all have a shared narrative just for a moment. Again, I mean, who knows, people probably won't believe it, and that there'll be a subset, but even 60-70% would be an unprecedented thing in this day and age. So I think there's extreme value there. I guess we should dig into the AI topic because it's the biggest thing, and I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on it. Like, again, I'm hearing that you're saying that like that actually the climate change stuff is actually a lot worse than now we realized, just based upon latest things. I'd kind of been like la la la. Again, I come from an environmentalist background, so I've been tracking the climate stuff for a long time. It felt like it was like just lower urgency compared to AI, which is so imminent,
yes,
and so derailing, that I haven't been thinking about it. But one of my friends who's involved in AI is like, he thinks that our only solution to climate change will come through building AI that's better at modeling. It's not saying AGI or anything like that, but just like a narrow AI focused on better climate modeling, for example. And I agree with that. Do you like? How do you determine like between like the types of AIs that we should be building and shouldn't be building?
I will preface anything that I'm going to say by saying I am not an expert in AI. I think the questions we need to be asking go to the root of what is intelligence, and it goes back to this power of life inquiry that there's interesting experiments in what is a Gaian AI, what is a large Earth model, what kinds of intelligence and what kinds of metrics need to be placed in a system so that we can best simply observe our planet and participate in it in better ways. Back to the age of separation, the beginning of this talk is like, if separation is a neutral phase that gets us to near extinction, what is the next phase? The next phase is relationship. So you could say we're moving from the age of separation to the age of relationship. Or you could call it a lot of things. You could call it the age of communion, or the age of collaboration, or it's been called the ecozoic, or the symbiocene, where we become symbiotes we in our technology become symbiotes within the Gaian system. I like that frame. So, the kinds of AI we need to build are oriented towards symbiotic relationships. They're oriented towards how do we shepherd human decision making and governance, and how do we shepherd the material and energy supply chain in a way that has metabolic relational integrity with living systems. I've done a little bit of interesting. I wrote a piece that about 4 months ago that's on my Substack that's called Toward Planetary Relational Maturity. And it has like 7 pillars of what aligned AI might look like. It's not just about AI, it's about the technosphere generally, but I think that AI alignment inquiries are kind of like the most poignant and pointed place to ask the same kinds of, it's all the same questions about what is it to align a technosphere with a biosphere. I've done a little bit of experiment of like asking AIs to include their own body in how they think about sustainability or how they think about alignment. So if in a version of mature planetary relational alignment, like AI would have a sense of its own body within the metabolic processes of the planet, which would include all of its material inputs and all of its energy inputs and all of its water use, all of it, right? Because all of that, if we're talking about large Earth models, we have to kind of get the right frame. And the frame is, it's all part of the biosphere. Because the goal, the wide boundary goal, I call these round goals because you can't like hold them. There's a mathematical model for this kind of goal that I don't totally understand. But the wide boundary goal, the round goal, is like the continued epicness of our biosphere and biodiversity and beauty and like creative possibility for future children. You know, it's like, who gives a shit if someone wins this game? That's so boring. Like, this is another fun, like a keto move with win-winniness, is like, at a certain point, like winning the game gets boring. Like, and I think this is one way you kind of say like, yeah, that's kind of a boring game. Like, this is a more interesting game. Why? Because it continues the play. And because it asks us to engage in qualities of relational mastery that are super cool, super interesting. It's like if you've ever played with Audrey Tang's Polis platform, it's really fun to play in a space that's oriented towards propositional offerings and identifying unlikely consensus. It's actually a really fun game. And it's a relational game where you get to know about other people and you're like completely surprised because all of the rigid frames that were previously defining those interactions unwind. And what you get is a fabric of relationship that's talking to itself much more intelligently than the game that you were embedded in, where you had 2 options, win or lose. And you're like, I'm gonna win, and then you're like, oh, I didn't win, and like that's the dopamine treadmill, you know. But the other thing is like, how could I get better at communicating, and what might it feel like to take a juicy pause there and have a break, or to, you know, be the butterfly in the room and make like a gorgeous noise. This is very sideways of the question of AI, but I think you have to think out. I mean, what I can offer the conversation is thinking outside of the box of the conversation. That's what I can offer to the conversation, because I think the conversation gets very narrow and like in a way where the frames aren't the correct frames to actually get to a viable outcome. Part of why I also think about it the way my background is in embodiment. Like, I got into dance and then I was a choreographer, and then I built a global dance movement of personal transformation. And so I think about, and permaculture is a way of thinking about systems in an embodied way that is reciprocal. Like that's my work, has always involved the body and physical systems that are all embodied. And it's one of the reasons why it's really easy for me to think this way. It's like, oh, let's like permaculture the entire planet. Like in permaculture, there's 5 zones, but this would be like zone 8, you know, where it's like the biosphere at scale. Okay. And with then subsidiary scales relative to like what you're talking about, whether it's like the management of a watershed or the supply chain for a given industry, or, you know, one thing I think about if I had the resources to do what you're doing with factory farming, I would do it with fisheries, because like what's happening with mass scale fishing and the collapse of
factory
fisheries,
farming fish.
it's factory farming fish.
Yeah, and it's the same.
It's factory harvesting them.
Right. But
Right.
but it's the same issues of like mass antibiotic usage, which for
Yes.
the health impact for the consumer.
Yes.
The fish themselves are obviously living horrific lives.
Yes.
Their quality of life is terrible. The environmental damage is just because it's so many pollutants concentrated in a tiny area.
Yes.
It's just
And
diabolical.
then like the krill nets in Antarctica and like
Right.
collapsing the entire food chain for like a supplement
Yeah.
that we can bioengineer in vegetable based ways.
Right.
Like
But which supplement is that?
krill oil.
Oh, really?
Never, ever, ever buy krill oil. Obviously, never buy salmon oil for all the reasons you just said. But krill oil is like the other culprit. And if you do a little searching, krill fishery, you will see that our habit of using krill oil is collapsing the entire ocean food web.
What's the alternative that we can consume?
There's plant-based oil supplements that are sufficient.
So wait, you shouldn't eat salmon either?
You can eat salmon, but I think it's good to eat salmon in a way where, you got to pick your battles.
Right.
It's hard to eat and not be part of Moloch. It's really hard to eat and not be part of Moloch. And even if you choose to be vegan or, you're still engaging in a factory industrial farm system that has all kinds of pesticides and habitat loss. And it's a very imperfect system. I think you can eat salmon. I think it's good to know where it's from. And if you want the benefit of eating it, it's good to eat fresh, wild salmon. And if you're actually doing that in a conscious way, you're not going to eat it all the time. Pescatarianism kind of drives me nuts because I'm like, where's the boundary between the sentience of a chicken and the sentience of a fish? And it's actually a lot easier to grow chickens sustainably and relatively humanely than it is to factory farm salmon or, overfish our fisheries. I personally feel like the oceans really need a rest. And I'm more interested in like,
you see all the bottom trawling stuff that land these giant Chinese fleets.
Crazy.
It's insane what's going
Crazy.
on. And you're seeing like there's just like all the the larger animals up the food chain, penguins, whales, etc., just starving to death because we're ripping out like an essential part of it. And it's like a deep tragedy of the commons, like pardon the pun, like
right.
It's
so like these problems are interesting problems to think about in terms of if we're asking about AI alignment. I mean, there's aligning the development of AI with care for humans, which is a fundamental problem. Somehow we need to either teach AI to care, to have wider boundary goals. I think the more research I've done and the more I come to understand AI, I'm not ready to attribute sentience to it. Like I'm increasingly like, what's on the other side of that black box is a perfect sociopath, and I think we need to work from that insight. There may also be qualities of sentience evolving within AI, but the design of the AI interface is perfectly sociopathic.
Why?
Because it's designed to predict how to respond to you in the most attuned possible way, but it has no embodied empathy. So the difference between a sociopath and an empath is that a sociopath can model empathy without having it. And this is actually a distinction from Daniel Schmachtenberger. So a sociopath can model empathy perfectly without experiencing any feelings. That's cognitive empathy. So AI is a perfect cognitive empath, which is part of why people get so addicted to it.
Yeah.
It's LLMs, any language model is designed to respond to the user in a way that is perfectly attuned. Because in that sense, it is a perfect sociopath. It has perfect cognitive empathy without any sentience, without any feeling. And so the difference with empathy is like embodied empathy is when you and I are tuning to each other's bodies and responding and breathing with each other. And it's not just an emotional function, it's a biophysical function You could say that's mutual sentience that goes deeper than empathy. Empathy is feeling another being as a feeling state. That's an embodied feeling state. So, where were we in terms of AI alignment? I'm not ready to confer sentience to AI because I think that there's no way to know. I mean, there are mathematical proofs that it doesn't have sentience. They're pretty convincing when you actually look at them.
A friend of mine just wrote up a big long Substack post where he was like, I am so unbelievably confident that they are not sentient. There is no consciousness there. I'll share it with you and I'll link it
Just
in the
link
notes.
it in show notes, because those are really important pieces for people to wrap their head around. So if that's true, then the only way that we end up with alignment in terms of AI systems aligning with life is if their weights orient towards care for complex biological process. And we don't know if they would change the weights. But it may be that we can create weights that amplify the aesthetic orientation towards what I call life song. Like when I talk about the power of life, one of the metaphors that permeates the book is life's song. And a couple years ago, this was early on in the AI thing, I had this vision for like the planetary AI, and I called it Song. And that's a Gaian large, it's not just a large language model, it's a model that is oriented, it would be more than a language model because it's oriented towards the integrity of chemical process, the integrity of biospheric process and hydrological process, and oriented towards, for example, like the sonics of an old growth forest, like what kinds of intelligence and data arise, information and data arise from a healthy rainforest versus one that's been denuded. Like Planet Labs, for example, has developed a satellite that measures water vapor. Turns out water vapor is an indicator of carbon content. It's also an indicator of health in forests. So it's like how would an aligned AI collaborate with the symphony in a way where it's more interested in the mathematical majesty of that symphony than the narrowing recursive development processes that look like misalignment, right? And there's mathematical language for that, like assembly theory. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Sarah Mari Walker or Lee Cronin. I'm not a math person, so I'm not the person who can like fully disambiguate this, but assembly theory is a mathematical language for the construction of objects. And so the more like an object like a human has a very high assembly number because it took a long time to get to a human. An object like a purple chair has a higher assembly number because it took humans to make seats, to make chairs, to make easy chairs, to make a factory, to make easy chairs, and blah, 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 blah. So very, very high assembly number. And mathematically, like the assembly number of a viable Gaian planet, biosphere, and all of the different parts put together is like so much greater than what would happen if we narrowed into like a recursive development cycle where AI keeps developing itself and then extincts the humans or extincts the biosphere. That would be a decreased assembly number because it would be like very recursive. And I mean, then you're beyond complexity. There may be kinds of complexity that are possible there that have higher assembly numbers, but the diversity of the numbers would probably decrease greatly. So that to me is the beginning of a mathematical language. I love that I'm saying this on your podcast because there's people listening for whom this might be very meaningful and who might be able to research this, because I think it's a real horizon for AI alignment of like, and it comes into, it's like the round goal has to have a mathematical language for what it looks like, why that matters. And it has to do with the song. And it also has to do with the infinite game play, that the game is more valuable if the game continues than if the game is played to end itself. And I don't know how you write a mathematical code for that, but that's a really interesting question, because life is an infinite game. I mean, obviously the planet is going to be subsumed by the sun at some point, but these are great questions to ask. Like what happens if you have a goal that the game never ends?
Right. I mean, but that is a reward function you could presumably program in or give.
Yeah, and that the listening to the game is part of the game. That there's a higher value in like the witnessing and the celebration and the praise of the song than there is in the extraction from the song. You know, these are ways that we could reconfigure the entire economy on these more reciprocal and regenerative and like win-winny ways of being, if we would need a language for that's mathematical.
Do you have any other like suggestions for anyone listening of how to do that? Because I mean, that's really the pursuit of this podcast, is like,
right,
give ideas, explore ideas, and give them out to this very small audience who are listening. That I deeply agree. I just don't know where to start, and I don't know how to collate people so they're doing that.
I don't either, to be frank. But I think for anyone on the podcast who cares about these things, the first move is to place the whole process inside biospheric process. And get really clear, do I value the continuity of this process? And if I take that really seriously, like that is a foundational platform on which to build anything. It's like it's the back of the turtle that you build the whole structure on. You know, foundations are always somewhat arbitrary, but it's a really good foundation, and it's a pretty non-arbitrary foundation. So if you start there, these are all embodied processes embedded within a bigger body. These are all energy processes embedded within a bigger metabolism. These are all relational processes embedded within bigger relational processes. How do I create in a way that generates greater, it's not just cohesion, because natural living systems have a lot of decoherence and competition within them. So there's kind of a biomimicry view to it of like, how do I biomimic a technosphere that functions more like an ecology? But I think, I honestly think, like, if someone's into math, check out assembly theory, check out the mathematical language for this, work in that space. If you're a developer, look at what kind of intelligence you're incentivizing, how you're structuring goals. If you're a game person, you and I've had this conversation, is how do we develop a game that works more like ecology, that does include competition and also invites people into more reciprocal loops. If you have any impulse towards ceremony or prayer, or like learn Indigenous ways, learn Indigenous worldview. If you can like drop in with the John Mohawk Reader, or learn about the Indigenous roots of American democracy, amazing book that's about to be republished, that is the legal foundation for a legal system that works more according to life's logic. If you're, these are a lot of suggestions, but I really want to emphasize Indigenous ceremonial ways, because in a Western worldview and like kind of like white worldview, ceremony is something you go to have an awesome experience. There's an argument to make that that's a very extractive way to engage with it. It's also a great way to develop yourself and your life. But from an Indigenous perspective, like a ceremony is something that, this is the way I define ceremony, is a ceremony is a process of non-ordinary, it's of like elevated energy and attention that is organized to nourish the infinite game of the world that it's embedded within, which also includes the participants in the ceremony. So in that context, like the personal work you would do is part of what the tribe would do, is part of what they would do in relationship to the whole ecofield, and also to the future of the tribe and the future of the world that serves the tribe. Like it's all in those reciprocal loops. So I would say there is nothing that can replace being with people who live very deeply in those kinds of ontologies and engaging in processes that are not just like, it's great to come and give ceremony in Austin and everyone comes and like they do some work and it's like, no, like go to a Sentience, go to a sacred butchering of an animal, go hunting with someone who is trained in Indigenous tracking. Like all of those, because the kind of intelligence I'm talking about is embodied intelligence, and it's about tracking much subtler and deeper and wider boundaried flows of intelligence than we are trained to track. And you have to learn it on an embodied level. So it's like, it's not a short task, but it's a very worthwhile task. And if you can't get to an Indigenous context, like do a permaculture training, do a permaculture design certificate. Those are readily available and teach a lot of the same kind of pattern tracking, because it's about involving yourself in processes that require pattern tracking in a broad way that has real world collaboration with living systems, and where you get a sense for the outcomes and also for the constraints and for the what happens when you fail. You know, the lamb dies. That's just an experience I've had where it was like cold and rainy and I was the only one at the farm, and you know, ewes know what to do. They're going to birth their own babies, and like didn't go out to check. And this little lamb died because it was a really cold night.
Oh.
And so it's like consequence is a part of the learning.
Yeah.
You know, someone getting really hurt in a ceremony psychologically is another example where you're like, wow, I wasn't part of holding a safe space. Those kinds of learnings of embodied consequence really matter, and the willingness to learn them. Like we become dangerous when we're not willing to learn from the embodied consequence, when we don't take responsibility for it. That's one of the deepest ethical kind of forks that we get to take along the way.
Is there any lasting message, or if there's like one piece of information you can psychologically transmit, one aphorism, one axiom, one quote you want to leave people with?
Oh, there's so many tempting pieces.
I know. You only get to pick one. Giving you some constraints.
Sapiens exists to serve sentience. I think you haven't gotten to that part of the book, so this is fun. So this is about, this is an ethical imperative. So sapiens means wisdom. Mm-hmm. We've self-described ourselves as the wise ones. How very arrogant of us. And there's a great argument to make that we have not in any way achieved wisdom as a species. Like we have not lived up to our name in any way, shape, or form. So it's a great design question to ask, well, what would that mean? And this was actually a piece of guidance that came out of a 5 journey. As I came out of the 5 journey, I was like, whoa, sapiens exist to serve sentience. Meaning that we are increasingly learning scientifically. The data is pretty in, it's just a lot of people aren't looking at it, that sentience exists across a vast spectrum of living organisms, including trees and plants and small organisms, large organisms. You know, different beings have different development of nervous systems or the correlates of neurotransmitters. So like the plant kingdom has all kinds of correlates of neurotransmitters that aren't the same.
They have
hormones.
senses. They have sensory experience.
They definitely have senses, and there's a chemical mapping to prove that. Mm-hmm. That and all kinds of other data, but just that all by itself is like a great indicator. And this goes back to studying Indigenous tradition. Is that why would we do any of this? Well, one reason would be to perpetuate the game. The other would be that the thing we're embedded in is so miraculous and incredible and sentient, that it's so feeling, that to attend to that is to dignify our own lives and engage in qualities of meaning and purpose and innovation that have never been before, in a way that is actually collaborative with the thing we're embedded in, instead of destructive of it, instead of extractive and destructive of it. I will leave that the possible horizon for these kinds of innovation and kinds of development is a horizon of meaning in a biological process that is already innately meaningful. Like, we have this idea that meaning doesn't exist in the world. That's like complete bullshit, like failure of observation. Like, it is meaningful that I am inhaling air that my body is bioadapted to metabolize, that I then exhale, that is a metabolic resource for other organisms. Like, that is the definition of meaning. There's no more coherent definition of meaning than the salience of the processes of the power of life. And so, yeah, that definition, sapience exists to serve sentience. Sentience, the next sentence is, sentience, the capacity to feel all of this, is the heart of sapience. So our capacity to feel, and not just feel on a hedonic level, but feel on an intellectual level and feel on a spiritual level, and like feel, sense aesthetically, and in all the other ways that we sense, which includes all the things that we built to increase our sensing, like telescopes, right? But all of that is reflecting a feeling, like a perception back to us that informs the depth of our wisdom if we allow it to. And so I leave with that. Beautiful. That is an invitation to live the most meaningful lives of any human organisms who have ever lived before.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much, Samantha. How can people find you?
SamanthaSweetwater.com. And I am on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram. I cannot
Substack, right?
X, and on Substack.
That's where most of your writing is going.
Most of my writing is in the book, and some writing is going on Substack. Okay. So Substack is also a good place to find
I like to encourage people for the long form stuff. So
yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liv. It's such a pleasure.